yesterday, I don't remember exactly how it was the sentence, but I said something about, are you ready to die? And that's it. I don't think I continued the subject or... and then someone told me that maybe some background knowledge would be good. Simply, of course, we know why sometimes we talked about dying while sitting on a cushion. For sure, it has happened literally, like during the history of Zen. People have collapsed. I remember reading some Korean, I heard some telling some Korean nunnery. I mean, there are plenty of temples for sure, but this was somehow they were telling, and it's not so long ago, maybe let's say hundreds years ago or something, and that was a kind of tough nunnery, and they were practicing hard there, and they when they had Sessins, they were a little bit of, I think it was so that they felt a little bit proud when they could give a number of deaths after Sesshin. And since it was winter time, because it was this hard, maybe Rohatsu Sesshin or something like, so they kept those bodies behind the altar because that was the coldest place, so they could store them there until spring. So they had a pile of bodies there. So that was a sign that the training was good. It was hard enough, and of course you always lose few soldiers. But that was quite literally so I didn't mean that we would be short of people very soon. But I remember how when I studied in Zengården, Sante Roshi, quite often he made this quote, something like, if you die before you die, you will not die when you die. And it rang somehow, sounds cool at least. And that particular one is some Christian mystic who said it. But it could be some Zen monk also. And then you think, of course, if you die before you die, then you won't die when you physically die. So we will die physically, that is quite sure. So that was about this dying part. We also quite much interested in being alive. And in this case it means both. Dying while living is truly being alive. We have passed through those opposites. We don't waste our life for being troubled about life and death. Why we should? It's in front of our eyes, this lotus land. It was a couple of sessions ago I read this Kaploroshi text. There's this postcard. And And since this is also dealing the same subject, this is a quote what he has said. Zen is the heart of the Buddha's teaching, and as such, it deals with the most fundamental problem of all, birth and death. A mystery every human being must resolve. People are not given the choice as to whether this is something they want to deal with. It is our nature, the nature of life, to have to deal with it. It is the teaching of teachings, for it is inescapable. On the bottom of all our questions, there lies this question of life and death. Probably most and many of our problems would somehow mystically disappear if we would face the death, like a death coming very close, physical death. If we know that we have only a few days left, for example, I don't think we would spend our time to worrying those things that we have maybe worried years after years. And suddenly when we know that this was this, we would think that that was waste of the time. Why I was worrying all those stupid things. In that sense, it is understandable why they had, where it is, which is being practiced. It's being practiced for peoples, monks and such, to go to see dead bodies, and some countries you really can see those dead bodies much more easy than here. To see how they will decompose and those things being practiced. Graveyard, sitting in the graveyard through the nights, and so we would remember that this won't last forever like this. I was once in seeing this autopsy thing in a hospital, watching it, and yeah, it left a kind of a memorable print. That person, actually there were two people lying, and they were really dead. It was good, of course, otherwise. But they were so dead that, of course, everybody who has seen dead people knows that you don't think that they are alive anymore. There was something missing. Body was there, but some sort of spirit was gone. And we all will end up like that. So, but now we are still alive. And of course it's not any kind of punishment that we have to die. It's just natural thing. Otherwise we wouldn't even... That's the sugar and salt of life, of course. Everything is impermanent. It's a dance, one could say. Seasons, 4 seasons. If it's winter, it's just winter. It's snow and cold like it was this winter. And now when spring, it's just spring. I had one friend who we met kind of accidentally after 20 years or so, and I told that I'm doing this. This was already 10 years ago. I'm doing this practice, and he didn't, but he was jogging a lot, so he liked to run, and yeah, he described how when he's running he gets this feeling of being a kind of in samadhi kind of state also, but there was something else he said something that he sometimes dreams or thinks of being in a coffin, like lying there underground. I mean, like a dead, and somehow that inspires him because he's not dead yet. At least he wasn't 10 years ago. So then, when he imagined himself lying there as a dead person, and then he suddenly see he is alive, he say that he can appreciate every moment more when he remember this thing. But this practice really takes us even beyond that. This beyond is not far away. It is this dualistic mindset we have that makes things look like they are far away or something like that. This dualistic mindset creates this notion of life and death. If we somehow mystically could drop it, like when we are practicing deep Zazen, when we are really present, we can truly open up, or we are opened up all the time, but suddenly we get touched. We touch that fact that is all the time present. Suddenly we are it, without being anything special, because everything is equally alive and special, if you like. So maybe it is, or why not we pick up one koan? And see what happens when we first read it, and then I will say a few words, I think so. This comes from koan collection Hekikan Roku. And usually, I mean, here are some people who doesn't know what is Hekikan Roku, for example, so maybe it is quite polite to say a few words. Not long speech about those things, but koan collections are old. They are made long ago, like Hekikan Roku. Not exactly 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, but almost. And maybe it was actually. What is now? 2021? Yes, maybe it is even 1,000 years old, just 1,000 years old. And we are reading it, we are practicing it, we are using it like a contemporary thing. And it's 1,000 years old book. It's quite interesting. Not in many schools they study these old books. They would say that they are outdated badly. But in this case, that's not the case at all. So it was some time 1,000 years ago when those koan collections appeared for some reason in China. It was some cultural thing at the time. And in this particular koan collection I only know now those Japanese names, but this monk was called Teisho. He was a Zen master and also he was a poet. And as it is in case in Hekikanroku, there we have this kind of poetry. It rings a poetry sometimes when you read it. There is a kind of poetry flavor sometimes. And this Teisho was, I think he had a hut. And maybe there he wrote his poems and was chilling out. And then he had a calligraphy on his wall hanging there, and there were only 2 kanjis, and those kanjis were Hekikan, and that's where this book got its name. Roku means just simply collection, so Blue Cliff Records. And then it was, and this book, this Hekikanroku, became popular. I think, I don't know, was it the aristocrats or politics or important people like to study it, and it was thought that it is a serious book and it expresses something important about Buddhism and Zen practice. Although Zen, was it Zen even then existing? Like obviously. And then 100 years later there was another person, another monk, teacher, Engo, and he, like was custom many times, he commented those earlier texts, and he wrote the introduction there and here and some comments, longer and shorter comments for each, in order to help readers to understand this original meaning of the text. But for our eyes it sometimes is as much complicated than the original text, but the main text. But he wrote them, but then he changed his mind. At some point he started to think that we shouldn't do this kind of thing. We shouldn't write records about Zen, because Zen it's this. How can we write this? How can we write this? It will lose immediately. It becomes something quite different. This is something we don't write, which says this is it. We all now have it fully, completely, equally. And then people, of course, they makes up different fantasies and ideas about Zen and those things that Buddhism is talking about. like we do. We start to think some wonderful things that will happen if we practice, and which is a good, of course, it inspires. But sometimes those fantasies becomes also hindrances, or even something more terrible. They becomes something that we want to achieve in order to become someone, some power play, or being an important person, or something like that. And then he simply destroyed what he had written before, and he destroyed also this Teisho's manuscripts and book, those prints that you can, that you can print the book, those wooden things. He destroyed all he got in his hands. But there was another monk then. Actually, I'm so sorry. This was a mistake. It was another guy who destroyed. It doesn't matter, but there was this Engo. He didn't destroy anything. It was his student who gladly, after his teacher has disappeared, decided to destroy everything. He was also Zen master, but he was thinking what I told that Engo was thinking. So there were 3 people involved in this crime. But there was some monk somewhere, somehow, who had copied partly and somehow could later on put together almost entire piece again. No one knows is it exactly what it was, and there are some parts missing, but anyway, that's why we today have it. After some turmoils. Okay, maybe that gave some kind of image, at least that it comes from China. Like many other things, like Zen and some clothes and toys and wisdom. This koan is called Turning Over the Tea Kettle. Kettle. The case goes, when Minister Wang went to Shokei temple, they were making tea. Rojosha lifting the kettle. Is it a kettle? Kettle. Thank you. Because it's some kitten or something that I'm talking about, it sounds stupid. Lifting the kettle. Lifting the kettle to bring it to Myo-sho, who was the head monk. So Rojosa happened to overturn this kettle. Seeing this, the minister asked, "What is under the tea stove?" Ro said, "The god of the..." Another difficult word. It's kind of the god of the stove, I would say. The word here is hearth or something like that. I think it is this heating system. But it looks like written like a heart almost. And I'm not so good in English, so this is very difficult. That's why koans are so difficult. You have to be able to read and even understand these words, and just sitting is so much more simple and clear. So, the god of the stove is under the tea stove. The minister said, "If it is the god of the heart, Why has it upset the kettle? Rosaid, 1,000 days of government service and only one accident. The minister shook out his sleeves and left the room. Myosho, who was the head monk, said, Rojosa, you have long eaten the food of Shokei temple, but still you wonder about the countryside gathering charred wood. Ro said, what about you? Myosho said, that is where the devil gets the better of you. And Teisho, who is compiler, who compiled this collection, add also his own comments. At the time, I would just have kicked over the tea stove. Maybe I should read it 7 times more, that we get any picture of what's going on here. But at least we know there was some tea served, which is very everyday thing in those places back in the days in Asia, even today. Even we had a tea ceremony when we started this Sesshin. So those tea ceremonies, they comes and goes in practice like Zen. Yes, and we had this different tea ceremony. As we know, we had this Japanese whisked tea, this matcha tea ceremony here. The first one we have had ever conducted here, and I don't think it was the last. It needs more preparation and it needs this high quality tea, but it was quite nice. And it was quite formal also. So those things can sort of they formulate, or they are marking something along the way. So I think in temples like this, even this Sanneji, is important that if we now and then can have something like little bit not fancy, but something that marks, takes a little marking. It's a kind of celebration, simple celebration. And I think tea is usually taken in silence. So we are just tasting it. And all sounds that comes when, like last time, when we had this rakusu, Yukai rakusu ceremony. And first we had this tea ceremony. And while we were sitting here quietly and you could hear how water was running from the thermos, it was thermos, to the bowl, and little sounds here and there, and then you wait your turn, and then you get this tea, and it tastes so festive. And you hold your cup using your both hands. You kind of feel the cup, and it's a practice, of course. It's a beautiful practice. So not just having a cup of tea, but being open, being one with the tea, being the tea, becoming the tea, and all the rest that is happening. And in important occasions, those temples, always when visitors, that was actually my fantasy at some point, that was maybe 100 years ago, but much before we ever was even fantasizing having any temple here, but it was long ago. But when I was anyway thinking, if one day we have something like this, and if I some strange reason happen to be there, like in some having some post, some work, then I thought that if it's possible, and always when someone is visiting here, some guests, I will offer tea to them first. Of course, that haven't happened yet, but I know in Pukoguchi temple that Kempo-san is from. Always the Roshi there, when he was feeling better, he was then so old when I was visiting there that he didn't do that so often, but I think he always served good quality, high quality matcha for many visitors. Some guests who came to see him, always. So they take time to do that, sitting there on the tatami mats and viewing the mountain, and cool breeze comes through the doors, sliding doors, and there you sip your tea. It sounds very romantic also, but it is real deal. It's what really happens. Exactly like this, what is happening now. Tea tastes same than Zen, they say. Perhaps it also means that when we really can be this, what is happening, we start to enjoy it, like we can enjoy a cup of tea. Completely immersed, going nowhere, coming nowhere. Always being here drinking tea. This is where I was born, with a cup on my laps or hands, and this is where I was born. Every moment like that. So, but in this case, something goes a bit wrong, we could say. Or at least this server, why I choose those words that I can't pronounce, server. Anyway, he was bringing the tea, but whoops, it's now splitting out everywhere. And then this minister, who is a guest, asked what is under the tea stove. And then this Ro says that the card of the hearth. I read from some older translation from this, and I think it was different word here than God. Or maybe I'm wrong, maybe this doesn't really mean God. But the word that was before used was actually leg of the, there was this, we see maybe those iron, some sort of maybe iron stove that has legs. And I think the word was maybe, perhaps originally meant that there was this, those legs were under this kettle or the stove. And maybe something was wrong with this leg, and that's why there was this little accident happened. And then the minister continues that why this upset the kettle. I'm so sorry. This is kind of a strange decoration here. unnecessary ornament. Anyway, and then this servant says, who is for sure practicing their monk, 1,000 days of government service and only one accident. It's actually quite good saldo. It's 3 years in service and then only once you spilled your tea. But the minister shook out his sleeves and left the room. And then this headman comes and tells that you've been here quite a time, and not 3 years, it's a quite long time for beginners. Long eaten the food of this temple, but still you wonder about the countryside gathering charred wood. This is of course koan, which means that I won't explain exactly what this is about. But then this monk asked, what about you? What about you, head monk? Of course you've been here much longer than I, but what about you? And Myoso says, that is where the devil gets the better of you. So, but now we have a technical problem here, and it's time. And we have also human error, because I didn't take account that. But it doesn't matter. We are happy, and we can be happy also next time, and we will. So we can take this, have another cup of tea tomorrow, and perhaps see again a little bit what's going on here. And I promise practice all night to pronounce cattle, so that I don't need to waste your time. May all beings attain the Buddha way.